So often I get the question, why is Russia like that? And what that means usually is like, why are they a totalitarian dictatorship currently under Vladimir Putin? Now, it's kind of a complex question because so frequently, whenever you're talking about any country with a totalitarian dictatorship, there's a long history that goes into it. But I thought in this video, I'd boil it down really quickly. In essence, the reason why modern Russia, is the way it is you need to look no farther than the last pretty much 200 years. You can go all the way back to the founding of Russia, but it's not really necessary. In essence, Russia, unlike the rest of Europe in the 1700s, didn't get rid of serfdom. Serfdom specifically is a type of slavery. It's often not considered slavery because Europeans don't like to kind of categorize it as the same type of slavery, but it's just as bad as slavery. It's being tied to the land and having no rights of property, and you're not allowed to leave, and you can be killed by your landlord at any time, and you have really no bodily autonomy. It's slavery. Here's the reality. Russia did not get rid of that form of slavery, serfdom, until 1861. And for those of you who are Americans on here, you're going to realize, wait a second, Abraham Lincoln, we got rid of slavery after the Civil War in 1864. For those of you who celebrate Juneteenth, you're like, whoa, that's only like almost exactly 3 years after we got slavery. And that is the reality for the Russian populace, is that the vast majority of them were serfs with basically no autonomy. So, what was their life like? It was short, brutish, and worked the land. Now, see, the Russians had this really terribly brutal system of enforcing their slavery of the Russian people by first making alcohol subsidized. That's where the stereotype of Russians and drinking vodka comes from, is they kept the price of liquor dirt cheap so that any serf could go out and drink his worries away. You're not rebelling if you're too drunk to. The other part was crush any opposition with extreme force. By the time Tsar Nicholas II's father is running around, there are several attempts at his life. Specifically, one of them is done by this bombing group, and one of the people involved in the bomb making is in fact Vladimir Lenin's brother. This is where Lenin plays into the Russian Revolution, etc. Because Lenin, believe it or not, is from a wealthy family on his mother's side, grew up sailing in like a lake and had like a really nice home that even had like its own serfs. Keep that in mind. And when he was even exiled for his first time, he himself had like people kept at his home. He was from a different class of people. And the reality is that when his brother died, it pushed him towards revolution, towards communism. And that is his story, but not the entire Russian people's story. I'm focusing on why Russia is this way. So if you're thinking about it from the perspective of a Russian person that lived in serfdom until 1861, your life did not change dramatically over the next, 70 years by the time World War I rolls around. Your life is very poor, and I'd say it's very similar to the experience of many sharecroppers had, is that realistically there was a massive class divide still. Even though they weren't serfs anymore, they still didn't have money. The middle class was minuscule. There really wasn't one. So this is the point I like to highlight, is that by the time the communist revolution happens, 1819, 1818, whatever you want to say, the Bolsheviks took over, the reality is that they really hadn't escaped from the shackles of slavery until, really, communism was instilled and a new form of slavery was created under communism, where the state owns everything. And the kind of scary part is that, very much so, the old system of government that was there resurged after Lenin's death, which he's a very controversial figure and he killed a lot of people. He's not a great guy. But the reality is that Stalin and his new ruling oligarch of generals became the new czar. And this continued. And by the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, and we have Boris Yeltsin going in, keep in mind those ideas of having socialized alcohol and brutally suppressing people were still in place. So, if you really want to think about the legacy of serfdom, that form of slavery, and the Russian people's mentality towards life, these are a people that have basically been enslaved for the last 1,000 years. Then suddenly, when the USSR falls in 91, it's a huge power vacuum, no different than in the 1918, whatever it was, when the revolution happened. So, it's with no surprise that Vladimir Putin and his oligarchs then fill that void, remnants of the previous government, very similarly with what happened in 1918. The point is that the Russian middle class would be the thing that destroys the Russian oligarchy. If we really wanted to systemically change Russia and keep people like Vladimir Putin from getting into control of these countries, it would be the way to stop it. The problem is that Vladimir Putin goes around committing atrocities like in Ukraine. For those of you wondering about why Ukraine, it was given over in the 1950s by leader after Stalin, blanking on the name. But the reality is that Ukraine used to be a vital part of Russia. And not only that, it is the historical capital, Kyiv, of the Rus. So that's where that idea comes from. And that's why he believes that Ukraine belongs to him, even though it does not, and it is an independent country. So when we get into the mentality of why are Russians the way Russians are, why do they have this very somber, this very stoic look on life, this very kind of negative, very, seemingly aggressive vibe, is you have to realize these are people that have been oppressed. And their oppression has never really ended. And going into, 2025, we look at where they're at right now, which is they're facing shortages of food. There's early signs that there is starvation. There have been over 700,000 casualties in this Russo-Ukrainian war. Their lives, even from the time of serfdom ending, has arguably not changed that much. So that's why Russian people are the way they are. It's why they have such a depressing look at the world and the system of government. They have never really had their own system of government that truly represented them. And that's why they are the way they are. If you're wondering where the animosity towards Americans come from, I want you to look into the 1918 revolution in Russia and look into American involvement. Most people don't know this, but American troops actually went to Russia and supported the Tsar, which is actually where that animosity begins within the Soviet Union and why we have such a adversarial relationship with Russia. It's not the entire thing, but I would say it is the first straw on the camel's back that led to such a bad relationship. And it's cool for me because it's part of Michigan history, because the guys who went to Russia were from Michigan, because it was the only group of soldiers that could withstand the cold, because we have horrible winters in my home state of Michigan. So cool little piece of local trivia, but it's worth looking into, and it's part of the reason why our relationship as Americans deteriorated as well. And it's why there's kind of this negative animosity towards us, is we supported the people who enslaved them for thousands of years. This is a trend in America. It's also why we supported the Shah of Iran and didn't go well, or the King of Vietnam. Weren't great choices. But anyways, that's my explanation for why Russians kind of have the disposition that they have, and why the Russian country seems to go through these cycles of totalitarian dictators. All right, peace out.